David Amram is a musical treasure, and perhaps one of the most gracious men you'll ever get a chance to meet. Active and going strong as ever at nearly 90 years young, David has befriended, performed with, collaborated with artists like the New York Philharmonic, Dizzy, Monk, Mingus and Miles, to the film director John Frankenheimer, to Arturo Sandoval, to Leonard Bernstein, to the writer Jack Kerouac, and I could go on and on and on and on. It's unlikely you're going to meet someone who plays jazz, French horn, penny whistle, and piano, sings folk songs while playing guitar in front of massive audiences, writes for and conducts symphony orchestras, performs the music of Native Americans, writes for major motion pictures and opera, and has a documentary produced on his life for the purpose of capturing at least some portion of this life lived extremely well. So obviously I had no shortage of things to talk to David about. Now, throughout the interview, watch and listen how David at times will lean into the camera, almost as if we're there in the room with him. And at times, he'll whisper nuggets of this priceless advice, recreating them just like he remembers hearing them from the lips of Monk and Miles and others. Now, but by the time he and I finally got down to business to doing the interview, he regretted to inform me that he had only had about 40 minutes to do the interview. And of course, he was volunteering that we could do it at another time. But for our benefit, it turned out that his ride was late. He was being picked up for a gig he's going to in New Orleans, some jazz gig. And we ended up talking for over an hour and a half. So here's my conversation with the great David Amram. Well, David, this is a real treat for me. I mean, I must say that for me to be able to speak to, an orchestral and chamber music composer and a jazz performer of many instruments, film composer, folk music, a guitar player and singer, collaborator and good friend of greats like Jack Kerouac, bandmate and or friends of guys like Dizzy and Monk and Miles and Mingus. I can't help think that if you'd really applied yourself, you could have made something of your life.
As they say in New York, what's the rush?
Yeah.
Basically, I always figured that the important thing, and I tell that to younger people, don't worry about building a career because that's almost impossible. But try to see how you can build a life. And music is one of the things that takes you on that wonderful journey. If you do what you feel is something that touches your heart and that you can learn from. And if it's something that makes you comfortable, the chances are you will not only learn something from it, but you'll gain something because the knowledge eventually, might take years, will happen. The friendships that you make, sometimes it takes years, will blossom and you'll be on a good path. And once you're on that good path and you know that there is a good path, then you can stand anything, any facts, any stupidity, all the negative torture that we go through. First of all, just to get the instrument out of the case and try to learn how to play it every day. Secondly, all the nonsense that you have to deal with when you're working with people, and the only people that don't know what's happening are the ones in charge of it. That can get you down unless you know that there's a higher path. And the higher path is by hanging out with those who are on a higher path and hope that they'll bring you along on the ride.
It reminds me of something I heard you say once that said, I never wanted a career. I just wanted to be the best musician I could be. And Mike, I'm curious, at what point did you make that distinction?
Well, I saw so many fantastic people who weren't recognized, and you'd say they didn't have a career. Why are you hanging out with them? Then I saw a lot of fantastic people who weren't even musicians, who were so knowledgeable and so worldly and were able to solve problems and so human and could relate and identify with others and made you feel good in their company. I figured, man, I want to be like that when I grow up. And as I'm about to hit 90 this coming November of 2020, still trying to be that way when I grow up. But I always tell my kids, you have to be responsible and pay your rent and do the basic things in life. But maturing too quickly can be dangerous for the health. And conversely, the old idea of accepting victimology and winology by allowing society telling you in some way you're a hopeless loser because you're following something that's worthless and you deserve to be unrecognized and die in misery. First of all, the live fast and die young philosophy is how to get rid of them in a hurry. And premature expiration is highly overrated. And secondly, there's a lot of beauty out there, more than we can absorb in a lifetime. And now with the advance in communications, people all over the world can learn from one another and then turn off the computer and join me as a freshman in the University of Hangoutology and find there's an extraordinary number of people that know more than we ever will, and they'll be willing to share it with you. And that way you get to be better because you learn more. And the tacit understanding is those who bequeath that knowledge upon you for free do it with the understanding that if you're lucky enough to become an old person, or even before that, but certainly when you get into the senior pauper portion of your life, you're supposed to recirculate those gifts that were bestowed upon you. And that's why you got that scholarship in the University of Hangoutology, because all the people who really can show you, just as you showed me how to even get online, which I can't hardly do for this wonderful program where we're talking here, me in Beacon, New York, about to go to New Orleans, and you in your beautiful place in Arizona, where I could see you and see all the beautiful buffalo hides and everything and pictures in your place. That's pretty amazing. That never happened before. And that access to information and interchange means that you could then turn off the computer and realize that everybody is a teacher, everybody is important, everybody is worthy, everyone has a gift, and you feel a whole lot better. Then when you see all the negative news and get all the great career counseling advice that you should give up, that's fine, but you know that there's another option.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Your life has encompassed so much, like I said in the beginning. If I gave you just 60 seconds, and I know this is going to be hard, who is David Amram?
Well, that's actually my grandfather's name, so I always think of him. And then I think of my uncle, who is named after him, who was a great influence on my life, David Amram Jr. And when the Philadelphia Orchestra played my piece called Trail of Beauty, based on the Navajo prayer of the 12th night and other wonderful texts and traditional music, he came to the Philadelphia Orchestra 4 hours before the concert started every night, went to the musicians' entrance, and when the musicians showed up about 2 hours later, he said, "I'm the real David Amram." He said, "I taught that young whippersnapper everything he knows. I could play songs on the piano. I showed him about American Indian music that I'd learned from South American Indians or South American Native people. I was the one that really showed him, if he ever moved from that farm we all had, he could do something." So to me, that's who David Amram is, and I'm named after him.
Well, you did that in 60 seconds. That was perfect.
I
One
went
of
a little overtime, but that's
one
what
of
that's what you call a more interesting non-answer than you would expect. And I never said that to anybody before. I mentioned my uncle and my grandfather, who were great. I'm one of many. And in fact, going to New Orleans, I first went to with my uncle in 1944 when he took me down, and he had shipped out of the port of New Orleans. I saw a second line for the first time, and I'd never seen or experienced anything like that in my life. And then, of course, when I began to hear all the wonderful musicians like Louis Armstrong and learned about all the other musicians that Louis Armstrong mentioned and the musicians that came after him, and worked with Buster Bailey, who was born in 1904 when I did the music for the Manchurian Candidate. Eddie Wilcoxon was born at the same time. Guys who were there when that all started, or didn't start, but when it became accepted and moved on. I had a feeling for what they were about and what that music was about. So for Splinter in the Grass, instead of hiring a bunch of people that never played the music with the director who never heard it and having it just be cosmetically enhanced trash, it was the real deal, because I understood the value and the beauty of the real deal and stayed out of the way, so that after I had written what I did, I said, let's just play. We'll take part of what we do. And Kazan, who loved actors and was such a great actor himself, always liked to make it seem real. That was basically the Stanislavski technique. Keep it for real, make it real. The actors become the person becomes the actor, and it doesn't seem like acting. So when Buster played in the Splinter in the Grass, it was so beautiful. And I honestly don't believe if my uncle hadn't taken me to New Orleans and made me understand the nature of that music, I would have gotten in the way or gotten someone else to do something that wouldn't have been that wonderful.
Well, you have been an innovator in film music, and I think back to the Manchurian Candidate, and there was this scene where people are in a room and they're being brainwashed, and you've got this kind of harpsichord music, which when we think of harpsichord, we think there's nothing threatening about that, but you're writing it in a way that has a lot of drama to it, and then you've got these high strings over it.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that?
Well, I was sitting in a room in 1962 at the Montecito Hotel, which was the funkiest place in Hollywood you could stay at, where all the New York actors came to do Wagon Train and different shows, and then spent the time sitting around the swimming pool, all reading the Sunday New York Times theater section and talking about their off-Broadway work. So they were all people who were out there who could make enough in a few weeks to support their acting habit in the theater for the whole year. So it was beautiful and stimulating and very inspiring. And when I went back to sit in my room, I said, man, this film is really interesting. Filmmaking is an art when it's done by artistic filmmakers, and writing music for a film can also be an art, because Alexander Nevsky by Prokofiev and some of Aaron Copland's scores and John Crigliano's scores are just terrific, because they were terrific composers who occasionally wrote for films. They didn't have a slew of orchestrators, ghostwriters, and a staff of people so that they could not have to waste their time composing and could go out and be hustling. With all due respect to people who do that, that's fine. But I wanted then, and still want to be all these years later, a composer whose music might have some value. And I said, if I just wrote some dumb schlocko music, that wouldn't be particularly unusual. But someday, if I were ever appreciated as a composer, I would have to apologize. So I said, man, I'm going to do it right. And John Frankenheimer said to me, David, two things. The Manchurian Candidate is not a Chinese war movie. Secondly, the film will tell you what to do. So that particular part, he sent me over. I was sitting there in the hotel room, grinding away, trying to think of something. He said, I've got a new version of a part of the scene you haven't seen in the film when these people are being brainwashed. I'm going to send it to you. So they sent it over. I opened up the door, put it in what called a little moviola. I watched that scene and I said, man, I must be freaking out, or he must be freaking out. It made me feel upset and unstable. The phone rang. He said, what did you think of it, David? I said, man, it made me almost sick to the stomach. It was confusing. Is that what you're actually going to use? He said, that's it. He said, I want to show the audience what it's like to be given psychotropic drugs by as kidnapped members of the armed forces and be brainwashed. And I want the audience to feel that they're being brainwashed. And I want you to do something musically that will make it even more that way. I said, "Ooh." So I thought of my great-great-grandfather who came over, landed in the port of Savannah, and my relatives still in Savannah. And I remember those wonderful things where they'd wear the big hats and the gloves and have those little fancy tea parties. And here he was showing that in the movie, but with all the crazy things where suddenly they became soldiers and suddenly became murderers. So I kind of took that Savannah gentility and thought I'd use the harpsichord of all things, which I'd only used for Shakespeare in the Park. I'd never used it in a film or for anything else I wrote. And I loved Wanda Landowski's version of Bach. It was so crazy, but I never thought I would write for the harpsichord. And they said, "No, we have a great harpsichord player out here who can do it and have a wonderful Pleyel harpsichord. They'll bring it." I said, "All right." So I wrote something that was almost sort of like a Viennese waltz with hideous, scary harmonies. And then 3 piccolos playing as long as the strings playing harmonics. And people said to me, "Gee whiz," they said, "that was so amazing, that music. How did you ever get it to be so scary?" And I said, "That was the easiest thing to write. The basic melody, which I wrote, and the counterpoint, which I'm proud of. I listened to it today. I said, man, that kid was okay," meaning myself back then, because it's too late now to change what I did in 1962. But when I listened to that today, I realized, and I remember, I kept saying, no, that's not right. It's not ugly enough. Since I was a composer in the 1960s who was writing melody, harmony, counterpoint, playing with these great jazz and folk musicians who cared about every note, saying something, looking for what they called the choice notes, I said, well, I'm going to turn the process upside down and take what's the most unmusical, hideous, unbearable, wrong harmonies and put them in over that simple melody in the harpsichord. And it worked out fine. And if I wanted to have done that and had my concert music make everybody either want to have a nervous breakdown, throw up, or leave the concert hall, I could have continued composing that way. It was easy. I just looked for what my heart and soul told me was wrong, hideous, and ugly. And I spend very little time doing that. I spend and have spent most of my life trying to look for what's beautiful that doesn't sound exactly what's already been done. That is beautiful. But if you're around beauty, whether you're a player, a composer, a chef, a playwright, a cook, an actor, a dancer, a gardener, a model airplane builder, a bus driver, it doesn't matter what you do, there's an art and a correct, harmonious way to do anything and everything. The moment determines which choice you make. And then of all the choices, you'll usually make a better choice if your DNA, the hard drive of your experience, is based on being around what seems to be correct and beautiful and warm and moving. So your instincts ultimately tell you what to do. And all the scientific stuff that you learn about helps you like a toolbox to get online, so to speak.
Well, I think your instincts were perfect in making that very uncomfortable. I think it was an extremely effective use of music for that scene. That was
Well,
really amazing. You know, David, when I think about your life and one of the outstanding things that I see is the relationships that you've built with people across all different music genres, famous, not famous. And I read a quote recently, and I want to read you a little bit about it. You said one time that New Orleans and Kansas City musicians thought that music is part of life, and that one's highest role is to be able to fit in with anybody, and everybody enhance what they're doing. When in doubt, leave it out and try and make every note a winner. And my question to you is that philosophy part of the key to you having built so many deep relationships with so many people throughout your life?
Absolutely. And a lot of the friendships I've made are with people that I wouldn't say no one's ever heard of. Not as many people have heard of them, who are also accomplished and beautiful and fun to be with and an education to be with. And I always wondered, as I'm about to turn 90, how come all those great cats and kitties, meaning the people of the feminine persuasion, were so nice to me, especially when I was a young kid. And I realize now when I see somebody 15 years old or 20 or 24 or 25, and I just sense they're really hot to trot. They really want to learn. They really want to do it. They want to do something beautiful, and they're gracious and enthusiastic and eager. I always feel that without a thought. It's just a feeling. And I realize, boy, that's me. Ray Barretto, the great conga player, we met when we were the only two non-full-time jazz musicians playing at the 125 Club in Harlem. Ray played the congas. I was playing French horn. Well, there weren't any French horn players except Julius Watkins, and he was busy most of the time. Although we did play there, it was always great. And Junior Collins, who was a fantastic improviser, unfortunately incarcerated too much of his life to let people, except those of us lucky enough to know him, hear him and play with him. And there were a lot of conga players, but Ray was the one who knew how to fit in to any situation and play with the other musicians, not for himself using the other musicians, but to try to be part of the whole. And I understood that years later, those guys and women must have accepted us because they saw we really wanted to be part of it, and we knew how to say please and thank you. It was just that simple. Then years later, we're playing for a big jazz thing for Jack Kleinsinger, that Clark Terry, Ray Barretto, and myself. And Ray's son was there, and my son Adam was there, and they were playing together. And I said, Ray, doesn't that remind me of you and myself like 40 years ago? And he said, that not only reminds me, he said, that is us. That's us now with the new generation. And so I think I was fortunate that people, for some reason, saw something in me and encouraged me to try to continue what I was doing. And now I try to do that to every single person whose path I cross. When I go to the Folk Alliance, I wouldn't say I'm a folk musician, but I love folk music. And when I go and play with all kinds of different people, I really enjoy it. And that reminds me of the highest levels I was ever part of when I played jazz. Just recently, the late Vic Juris was playing guitar just 2 weeks before he passed on, and Paquito de Rivera playing saxophone. I said, oh my God, those guys are so good. If I didn't show up, it would have been a great concert. I said to Vic, this was just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. Vic, I said, you're the Albert Einstein of the guitar, but then when you play and someone else is playing a solo, you make everybody sound better. And he said, quote, out the side of his mouth, you gotta leave some space. I said, wow. Then I spoke to Paquito. I said, Paquito, playing with all you guys. I said, where everybody is listening to one another, is that ever a pleasure? And he said, also at the side of his mouth, so no one would hear him, that's the idea. I said, boy, those two little mantras said by those two great musicians should be on the wall of the White House and Congress and Juilliard and Berklee School of Music and Harvard and every public school and any place where people are studying music or trying to learn how to play sports or be in the theater or do building a house together, whatever, or having a family. Just the idea, the famous train station signs of my youth during the Depression. Stop, look, and listen. They used to have those big signs up, so people wouldn't, drink a half a quart of whiskey and try to see if they could beat the train across the tracks. They say, no, stop, look, and listen. And that's really all you need to know in music. And then the great Cheyenne bumper sticker that Floyd Red Crow Westerman, who was Lakota, brought back and said, Dave, this would be good for your kids to have that. Put that in the house, not in the car. He said, respect, love, and sharing the Indian way. So there's all the knowledge you need to know is right there, really. And the great famous Rabbi Akiva, I believe, I'm not sure, I don't want to misinform your listeners, but he was one of those people that studied the Talmud so much he could put a pin through the entire, pages and tell you what word was on each page of wherever that pin was without looking. He said, all you have to know is the one prayer of what they call the golden rule. And he said, that's all you need to know. If you know that, you don't need to know anything else. That's it. And the great Sonny Rollins, whom I spoke to recently, said, now at this point in my life, I'm following the golden rule. He said, I'm happier than I've ever been in spite of my infirmities, because that life of the spirit is what it's all about anyway. And he said, that golden rule, he said, I've studied all the religions, because Sonny always was very studious that way. And he said, they all say the same thing. So I don't want to sound like Mr. Rogers gets down with the philosophy of life. And I've certainly made enough mistakes to write an encyclopedia of how not to do stuff. But basically, it's not that complicated if you try to do what seems to be the right thing. Chances are, in the long run, it's really worthwhile. And everything else that's part of the full greed ahead philosophy, I tell people, is already an overcrowded field, a non-growth industry, and should be left to the experts. And people who are hung up in that are such a drag to be with, and so unhappy that out of desperation, you figure, well, maybe I'll try to spend some time with someone I feel really got something to offer, even if I'm told they can't help you to network your way into being in charge, so you can be the swine of the month, but rather to look for the beauty part. And that's the basis of almost everything I think that's worthwhile, and something I struggle with every day to try to learn more about and to try to become.
Well, I look at it like this. You became a world citizen before that was kind of a thing. You've been all over the world, and the cultures that you've been part of and the people like we just spoke about. And maybe if I ask you about a couple of people, you can tell me maybe what the single greatest thing you learned from them was. And maybe we start with Thelonious Monk.
He told me to listen. I was at his place one time after I played with Mingus, and he kind of took me under his wing. He was listening to what sounded like some kind of country music by someone who'd never been in the country. I wonder now who shot my cow and the doggone bow wow somehow. Wow. I said, what the heck is that in New York City with the biggest, at least the biggest radio stations just about anywhere, except for the huge one in West Virginia. They had enormously powerful stations, and to have them play country music and I said, that must be the program manager's aunt or somebody. I don't think there'd be enough payola even in that time to bribe anybody into playing it. And he listened to that for about an hour. I said, Monk, do you really like this kind of music? And he said, listen to the drummer. I said, wow. I said, oh. He played about 3 more pieces, and then he turned to me and he said, check out his brushwork. So what he was saying basically was pay attention and listen, look for the beauty part and listen for the beauty part. And If you don't dig it, then do something else yourself. Don't be judgmental of what you think it is in relationship to what you should be. Rather, listen and look for the beauty part. And it's for the rest, you can ignore. You didn't ask me about him, but Jimmy Cleveland, a great trombone player, who wasn't, I guess, that famous, but boy, did he tell me something. About a year later, we were both got to Birdland early, which we always did, and stayed late because everybody there was in the University of Hangoutology and scholarship music courses for one another. We were talking about keyboard harmony and all this stuff. And then suddenly I got into this big rant that my landlord didn't care for me. My girlfriend had left me. No one wanted to hear jazz French horn. No one was interested in symphony compositions that use melody, harmony, and counterpoint, and all the jazz and all the beautiful music that surrounds us. I was going on and on. He was like the amen corner. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He finally said, Dave, let me pull your coat to something. I said, what's that, Jimmy? He said, don't put your business in the street. Bam! I realized no one wants to hear me whining and blaming. So unless you're going to pay a psychiatrist $300 an hour, keep that to yourself and try to think about something else, because other people probably have worse problems.
I think that's great. That's great advice to live by. We all have to catch ourselves doing that from time to time.
Oh man, when I do, you see, when I make those mistakes, I suddenly bomb. It's like a thing flashes up on your computer screen of your mind. You say, bam, I'm doing something wrong. Oh, I'm doing that, because you remember having the experience of done that, and someone bailed you out by suggesting maybe there was a different way to approach a difficult situation. And of course, playing jazz, improvising constantly reminds you of the sanctity of the moment. And that applies to all kinds of music, including written down music. And if you really get psychically attuned enough when you're conducting, you can feel that there's going to be, the train is not going to stop and smash into that car. You could feel a train wreck coming. And sure enough, it does come. And when it does, you're ready for it to help out, because the thing of conducting a symphony, just like being a band leader or doing anything, is to help out the situation, not to squash it, not to demolish it, not to overtake it, but to be an ambassador for the music. The best director is Jack Garfien. He was the first director who was ever asked to be a director at the Actors Studio, which is more for actors. He told me that Kazan got in an elevator with him once, and he said, you know, Jack, with all due respect to Stanislavski and all the people who supposedly have made it into a religion rather than a guide for actors, our job is to be guides. We're supposed to help them out. And I thought that was really fascinating. And he also was extraordinary in terms of Aristophanes, the great playwright, whom we all admire so much. He said Aristophanes appreciated it. He said, the only jealousy I have is of actors. People said, what? He said, yeah, because I can write those words. He said, but the actors can take any words and make them into something memorable and make them almost divine. He said, they can do that. We can't. And I thought, that's what a composer does. We're basically putting it down on paper, and hopefully a musician can take that off of the paper, feel something inside themselves from what they see and play on the paper, and then put themselves into it. And then people can hear that and feel what the person who's playing has to offer, as well as what the composer's dreamed of. And you have that thing called music. And that alone makes me feel better about having spent all those years writing chamber music and operas and symphonies and stuff that by the time it gets played by a really good group, very often you've forgotten that you've even written it. So it's not an instant gratification, but it's very worthwhile.
Well, speaking of conducting and being a guide, what comes to mind in terms of maybe some things that you got from Leonard Bernstein?
Well, the wonderful thing about Bernstein was he really wanted the whole world to fall in love with music. And with everything that he did, he never forgot that. And one of the greatest moments when I was the first composer in residence, and his green room door was open. He didn't have any bodyguards or lawyers or accountants or business people, and the management of the orchestra couldn't make him the great unapproachable maestro because he said, I want the door open to meet people afterwards who loved the music, if they did, because my job is to make them love that music. So anybody could walk in there. So this one person walked in and he said, Mr. Bernstein, he always pronounced it Stein. He said, Mr. Bernstein, my uncle played the trombone. There was a big hush, and I could see the management Philharmonic saying, oh my God. People who were, backing the orchestra, if they're in the green room and hear him talking to someone like that, they'll want to withdraw their funding. He said in his beautiful stentorian tones, I love the trombone. Since you're a trombone player, you can appreciate that too. And then you mentioned the Russian Easter Overture and the Rakowski March and Ravel's Bolero and all the hot trombone solos in the literature, and how much he enjoyed them and how different people played them, and how the great bass trombone player in the Boston Symphony that he used to hear when he was a kid could play, really articulate way down there and get such a big sound. And finally, the man went away really happy. And I could see that he had his whole life validated because of how much Bernstein was telling him that the instrument that his uncle loved was really a very important and lovable instrument.
That's beautiful. Well, you were good friends. You were artistic collaborators with Jack Kerouac.
Yeah, Jack, I met completely differently. I was at a bring your own bottle party. He was completely unknown. And I guess I was just almost as completely unknown as he was. I met him and Joe Papp, who ran the New York Shakespeare Festival, and Woody Guthrie all the same month on the Lower East Side. And Joe Papp later on said, yes, he said, we all met and that we had something in common. We were all total zeros. I love that. And Jack came up, handed me a piece of paper. He had on a red and black checkered shirt like a French-Canadian boucheron or a lumberjack. And he said, play for me. Then he took the paper back before I could see what was written. And he started reading something. I don't know if he was reading it or freestyling or making it up, or if it was a Gregory Corso poem or Victor Hugo, because he knew all that stuff from memory. But it was beautiful. And I was just playing something that I thought would fit in to what he was saying. And then he ran off and went dancing with some beautiful gal, and I went running off. And I kept bumping into him and found out he'd been a football player, and I had been a gym teacher. And we both spoke French at home, and he loved jazz and classical music and literature and people and sports. He was an amazing, warm, unpretentious person. And he stayed that way.
Well, we were talking about Jack Kerouac. What do you think his greatest gift was?
I think he fostered creativity in others.
And were you the beneficiary of any of that?
What?
Were you the beneficiary of some of that?
Oh, constantly. Because when he became a world famous person overnight, he never was able to deal with that. But he never, and drinking was something that was self medication, they call it now. We didn't know about 12-step programs at that time, or that it was possible to be able to, for anybody to be able to, you know, stop drinking if they were allergic to alcohol, that it wasn't a moral deficiency. It was like a allergy that some people can deal with and some people can die from. And in spite of that, he still always wrote up until he died. He still was gracious and kind, and he still stayed a friend. And what was really broke my heart was when he suddenly committed the worst crime you can in a popular American culture. He fell out of fashion. He never wanted to be in fashion. He just wanted to be a writer and have people read his books and have a good life and someday get a good family. And I think if he had lived as long as I have and hadn't died when he was 47, he probably would have gotten there eventually. And it just makes me feel sad that he wasn't able to be there. But his books that he loved, and loved other people's books too, are now read and translated in languages all over the world. And he's no longer considered to be the king of the Beat generation. That was just a branding name to justify his being out there. Now he's appreciated as an author, as a writer, an artist. And I've met so many people who say, you know, I never was really interested in writing or reading till I read Jack Kerouac. I said, now I'm reading books and I'm even writing some myself, and I'm listening to music, and I'm traveling around and hanging out with people. He said he made me see the joy of living. And that's pretty wonderful to be able to, if you can foster creativity or inspire one person in your whole lifetime, you're doing a lot. And he inspired a lot of people and still does and always will.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How well did you know Bird?
Well, that was in 1952. I was playing in Joe Timer's band as sort of their 21-year-old mascot, crazy French horn player trying to play jazz. And they had me come and sit in with them. And Joe Timer's wife, who was also named Joe, she was named Joe Matee, although actually she was married to Joe. And she came by my basement apartment where everybody used to come to hang out and have jam sessions and play. And she said, I'm going down to hear Bird. She said, come with me. You have to meet him. He said, he's a beautiful cat. I said, wow. So I went there, and the best 3 pages, I think, of my first book, Vibrations, are certainly among them are the description of hearing Charlie Parker for the first time, then going backstage and meeting him. And I had on what were called canoe shoes, which are those sort of like slippers with a zipper, kind of El Funkatissimo, especially back then. He said, man, those are some crazy shoes. I said, well, I use those. I'm a gym teacher part-time. He said, oh, my kids. And he started talking all about his kids and their gym teachers and sports. And he was just like this amazing, warm, wonderful guy. And I think when he saw I was appreciative of what he was doing, he said, you got to meet some of the cats in the band. And he invited Kenny Dorham, whom I ended up recording with later on. One of the highlights of my life as a horn player and a musician. And Teddy Kotick, the great bass player, Walter Davis, no, I beg your pardon. I'll think of his name in a second. I have the wrong name. And it was just amazing. Stan Levy was the drummer. And it was just terrific. The piano player also was great. And I did concerts with later. I'm thinking of, I gave you the wrong name. That's the person I played with when I played with Dizzy, that's on YouTube, Walter Davis Jr. This was a different, and I'll have to recall that. my once promising mind. Now, at least I know when I'm hitting a clinker. But it was just so wonderful to be with him. And then he came down to my basement apartment and just to hang out. And we had so much fun. It was just so wonderful to be with him. And he knew so much about music and art and painting and poetry, and also gave all of us who were there some terrific advice and encouragement. All of those people that we now think of as icons and everything were so different and gracious. And by different, I mean they had their own personality. Everybody has their own personality until it's talked out of them. Lester Young was famous for that. He said, man, he said, tell your story. And when you heard someone play, you knew it was them. Not just in jazz. When you heard Fritz Kreisler play, you knew that was Fritz Kreisler playing the piano, or playing the violin, excuse me. And when you heard Szigeti play, you knew that was Szigeti playing the violin. And, you know, Hootie Menuhin, they all had different ways. And Rudolf Serkin and Rubinstein and Clifford Courtauld, they had a certain way of singing. The opera singers, you knew if it was Richard Tucker, and you knew if it was Caruso. And when Biru Sayao sang in La Boheme, all these years later, there's still band. You hear 5 seconds, you know that's her. All these people had their personality and their gift and their contribution to what it was about. And we all have that. And one of the nice things about YouTube is you can go back and see some of those old timers and see how fantastic they were and how much they enjoyed what they were doing, how they listened and respected the people they were performing with. And then you can see some people today who are like monster good, who would have been buried forever if it hadn't been for the fact that they can go on YouTube and not have to spend 30 years out there hustling to get one good gig and trying to get others to promote them. By the works ye shall be known is the famous, by your work ye shall be known, a famous old biblical saying. That's by your work ye shall be appreciated. Stravinsky said music expresses itself. And now a lot of younger people are saying you could see somebody from the 1930s and see some 12-year-old genius today. So for all the trash and junk that may be on YouTube, there's never been a shortage of trash or junk prior to YouTube. We have more landfills and prisons in this country than any place in the world in terms of our, you know, per capita. So there's no shortage of that. But what we also have is a lot of beautiful places, beautiful people, beautiful forms of art and expression. And they're everywhere if you pay attention and look for them. And all those people that I mentioned taught me and still teach me when I think about them how to look for the beauty part and how to pay attention and how to try to get better and then share whatever you have with whoever you're with, because that's part of the gig.
I like that. Listen and pay attention. I think those are, I need to put that on my wall. Let me ask you about one more. I think you knew Miles.
Yeah.
What was the lesson you came away with from Miles?
Well, he almost could read people's minds. He was one of the most sensitive people I've ever met in my life. And when I first met him, I was playing with Mingus in 1955 at the Cafe Bohemia. And Miles had just come back from the Newport Festival that summer and made a tremendous hit. And they said, Miles is back, because he'd had all kinds of problems and sort of wasn't playing for a while and messed up. He came back and he was playing with this terrific band. And he would walk out of the Cafe Bohemia, go by the bar, walk out of the street to get some fresh air and some privacy. And I was there with Cecil Taylor, who was then loved Miles and Monk, and a bunch of Gregory Corso, the poet, a bunch of other people, painters, and just regular anybody. Miles would walk by, blap, 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 and slap us all five on the way out. About the second week I was there, because everybody in Mingus's band, we all came to hear one another. As he was going to give me the customary hand slap without ever saying a word, he motioned for me to follow him. So I went right out, and he turned to the left on Barrow Street and started walking towards Washington Square Park. We walked all the way to the park without saying a word. He finally turned to me and said, "Where are we going?" I said, "I don't know, Miles. I'm just following you." He cracked up laughing. And after that, we were very friendly. And I used to see him over the years. And I never tried to barge my way into his privacy because he had his own private way of being all the time. And mostly, you could almost feel as if you were talking to him by ESP. Now, I know when people start talking about that, or they talk about anything spiritual, right away, you reach for your wallet because you could feel the membranes of your wallet trembling because you know someone's about to come in there and rip you off by giving what they call the Burger King-ized version of spirituality. So when people start talking about that, whoa, and I try not to. But there was something so psychically attuned about him and kind of a spiritual thing that I realized he had a private life and was a private person, and he could appreciate it if you could send out a ray saying, "I appreciate that, and I'm not going to hog in and start slobbering and groveling." And so I always kept a respectful kind of a sense. A great Asian guitar player, Charlie Chin, told me, he said, "David," he said, "you're all right." He said, "because you have a sense of face." I said, "What the heck is that?" He said, "That's the Asian way of dealing with the idea that you don't come up to someone and go, blah." He said, "A lot of people do that. In New York, that's customary, and we're used to that." But he said, if you can show a little respect and sort of keep a respectful distance, sometimes that's appreciated, and people communicate that way. I'm sure that makes sense to all their listeners. And if they heard you play the trombone, they'd know that that's what you do because you play some beautiful stuff. And I heard it and I said, man, right away I could hear that guy's really an artist, and a lot of the artistic little nuances and things come because you're trying to fit in to something that's larger than yourself. So music constantly teaches you. It's constantly a humbling experience just to be part of something larger than you. And you realize that music is the star. Music is something that's out there, and we just kind of could hook onto it in some way, but it's already there. Boy, when you see that, all of the idea of having a skyscraper named after you or something becomes rather unworthy to even think about. Frank McCourt said that great. When I went to the Cork Festival, I was supposed to be the ambassador between classical, jazz, folk, and how they all are different languages, but they all are part of the beautiful vocabulary of life. And when I came back, Frank and his brother Malik said, well, Dave, how did you like it? Because I used to play at Frank's brother's bar, the Bells of Hell, that Maliki had. And they were great guys. And I said, well, they saw in my bio that I knew you and played with you and everything. So they treated me like a king before I even did anything, just because the fact that I knew you. Because they were from, Maliki was born in Brooklyn, but they lived a good part of their life in Limerick, which was right next door to Cork. And Frank said, well, David, he said, when we were going back and forth between Brooklyn and were broke, and my father was an alcoholic, and we had hardly enough to eat. We were starving half the time. He said, they didn't think much of the McCords back then. But when I had a book that was on the bestseller list for over 2 years, suddenly they had a different impression of me. And he said that the climax of that was when I was called up by a town official, and they said, Frank, we're so proud of you here. We want to build a statue of you. I said, oh man, what an honor. He said, not really. He said, I told him, no way. I said, well, why's that, Frank? He said, I can't bear statues of any kind. I said, how come? And he said, because I hate pigeons. So I always think about that too. And that way, if someone, pays you a compliment or you're given an award, you say thank you and you mean it and you're grateful, but you just say thank you. You don't say, I've already got 3 last week. Or I don't, Charles Ives, who sort of got the short end of the stick, to put it mildly, got discovered as a promising young composer when he was almost 80. And they said, Mr. Ives, you turned out to be such a genius and so far ahead of your time. We want to give you this some prize. He said, I refuse to accept it. They said, but Mr. Ives said, no. He said, awards are the badges of mediocrity. Now, you see, that's the way he felt. He started the Hartford Insurance Company, so he didn't need to grovel or slobber to get his next meal. He'd already quit composing because he realized nobody was interested in what he was doing. Now, I say that not to bum you out or your listeners out. I think he got so upset by the scene that he forgot, if someone appreciates what you're doing, you say thank you and you're gracious. And I'm sure probably in his heart of hearts he was that way. But if you allow the scene to destroy your love and joy of what you're doing and get so angry because the world doesn't, or a lot of the world, or a certain percentage of the world doesn't appreciate what you're doing, you have to get by that.
David, I don't think anybody would argue that jazz is not exactly the most popular art form out there, musical art form at least. And my question to you is, has that ever bothered you?
Well, Miles Davis said it but best in the title of his great song, So What? I always wondered, why would Miles, such a sophisticated, incredibly sophisticated guy, give such a wonderful song such a weird title? And I realized he was saying, well, all that trash and junk, injustice, bad taste, that's always been there. But so what? It's there, lots of luck, keep on that path. And I think if it doesn't reach as big an audience, when Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger both were the highest paid actors, I think they almost $20 million a film or something crazy. Laurence Olivier was getting $1 million, maybe tops, for one of his films. Does that mean they were 20 times better than him? No, it had nothing to do with that. And they're both terrific. And if people want to, I enjoyed seeing Sylvester Stallone, do and Arnold Schwarzenegger too. God bless them. They were making a living, supporting their families, doing the best they could. But I loved watching Laurence Olivier when he's the entertainer playing a broken down old comedian. And then when he was in that wonderful movie with Dustin Hoffman, where he played a sadistic German dentist, ex-Nazi, and almost every single role that he played, he was able to, he even played Othello. He's like, what an artist, what an actor. And so I realized that had nothing to do with value. It has to do with the business scene. And we have to remember that business scene that created the music industry and created millionaires like the Titanic, too big, too fast, didn't serve the needs of the customers, womp. The music business of today is currently down at the bottom of the barrel, along with the Titanic. All of us who were in the rowboats that didn't go down rode off to our next gig. We're still here. We will always be here. Jazz will be here when we're all gone. Beethoven, Shakespeare, Aeschylus, Mozart, and Kulthum, the great Arabic singer, and John McCormack, the great tenor, those people will never be forgotten because they're so damn good. So jazz is about excellence, and musicians have to realize that our job when we're there playing for people is not to be winologists and blameologists and saying, oh, it really sucks, we should do that. They're better jazz people to playing technically than ever. And they're teaching jazz in schools and around the world is still our greatest ambassador. And it's wonderful. And it's such terrific music. I don't even think about that now. I'm just so amazed when I see and hear all these fantastic people playing. And then to go and see young kids from all around the world at these jazz courses that are already scarifyingly good players and composing. And when I was down in Cuba and heard the new generation of players there who could play the Afro-Cuban music and jazz and classical music and everything else. And in places I've been all through Europe and Asia and Africa, everywhere, and the United States, all over in small towns where you wouldn't think they had any jazz. It's definitely not only here to stay, it's growing. And if the music is more prominent than the business dealings, that only means that the same trouble that plagues the performing arts today will turn out to be a blessing. We'll remember the small is beautiful, and that it's all our jobs to be ambassadors for the music, not to allow anybody to talk us out of doing it if we're interested, and to enjoy just the fact that this country has helped to create such beautiful, classical, international, creative music. It's just wonderful. And
you've been an advocate. You've played every style of music imaginable. You want to talk a little about what happens when you mix this stew of all these different types of music? What is the result of having all of that come out in whatever music you're doing?
You're influenced by different things, and all of the players come to their own conclusion of what their life experience has been. And that's why Lester Young and so many other people said, tell your story. So there's not one way of doing it. Each time I write a piece or play, I'm influenced by things and places I've been. When I'm with the Folk Alliance, for example, if I'm sitting with a bluegrass group, I'm not going to start playing something. I have my Dumbek with me. I'm not going to start playing a 17/4 rhythm or playing a wawanko if they're playing something else. Although you can play some of those percussion parts that fit in. But I try to do what the music tells me to do at that moment if I'm improvising with others. And if I have my own group and someone else wants to do something, you encourage that openness too. Dizzy used to have some amazing people play with him. And sometimes he got some really far out players and he would let them do what they had to do. And it was terrific. It was in context with him. That wonderful thing on YouTube that gets all the hits when I'm playing with Percy Heath and Roy Haynes and Dizzy and Walter Davis Jr. Boy, I mean, those guys, someone said, you sounded good. I said, man, those guys were so good. I could just have stood there and not played anything. It would have been fabulous. But the way it sounded like the penny whistles were part of what Dizzy did, because Dizzy liked that and asked me to do it. I played horn with him and percussion for years. And he said, no, bring them whistles. I want to hear that. And it was kind of funny because I thought, oh, he's going to think it's some corny, So I did the thing with the two whistles. And afterwards, he pulled his glasses down and looked. He said, you going to bring them whistles to the next gig? I said, well, if you want me to, Diz. And he said, people love that shit. I cracked up because I realized with all his sophistication, he wanted people who were there to have a good time. But I think there's no rule. And if I were asked to be years ago, before I became composer and artist for the Philharmonic, I was invited at a huge conservatory by a wonderful old Russian classical player. C.F. Peters, thank God, published my classical music way back then. He said, I saw your piano sonata. He said, your piano sonata. He said, it's not all plink plonk, putting toilet paper in the inside the piano and hitting it with your elbow and turning it. He said, you're actually writing some real music. He said, no, he said, quote, no tomfoolery. I said, well, man, I wonder what tomfoolery would say about that. Anyway, I thought, that's great. So I went down. They said, well, yes, Mr. Amram, we think you have a good way of relating to the young people. They said, the only thing is, you can't do anything involving your experiences in jazz. You can't mention it. You can't teach it. You can't go in Pittsburgh and play in the different places. You can't do that. I said, but that's like asking me to amputate a limb. I said, that's anything that I can do in music is because of a large part as a classical composer, because of what I've learned playing with these brilliant, creative, incredible musicians who make an improvisation sound like a great composition so often, and who are so brilliant in their choice of meaningful notes. And the guy looked at me and said, no. I said, well, so I was going to get a job as a bartender where I could just work 3 days a week and then do what I was doing. And instead, I was lucky enough from 300 people to send in my package and get chosen by Leonard Bernstein as the New York Philharmonic's first composer in residence. That was just a fluke of luck. And if I called you all the things I didn't get, all the packages of music I sent out that were never opened, all the things I applied for, and the thousands of people who told me what a jerk I was not to be doing what I was doing, rather that would certainly sabotage your efforts to ever become distinguished composer, all that. I wouldn't have done, that would be 10 times longer than the program that we're doing now. Everybody would turn it off, including me if I had to watch it. And it's not that interesting. So all I can do is to give you a kind of a convoluted answer. Each time I'm writing a piece, each day, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I just see that blank piece of paper. And then sometimes I get into it. And then the problem is the sun comes up and I'm still there. Get into that other world. It's hard to force yourself to get into it and hard to get out of it. Dizzy told me that the best. He said, Dave, he said, I know you're struggling with the French horn. You're writing all that music all the time. He said, every morning when I get up, he said, that trumpet's sitting there in the case waiting for me.
Well, this has really been a treat. And as I listen to you, I think to myself, you're almost 90 years old. What is the secret to having the vitality? I mean, the memory. I mean, to remember what somebody said 64 years ago on June 27th. Give us a little bit of a sense of what your secret is to have this kind of life and vitality throughout all of what you've done.
Well, I try to remember the nurturing pro-life. I know that's not the way that's usually used to celebrate the beauty of life. And I don't say it in the political context that it's become, which isn't that pro-life after all, when you get right down to it. Unless people who would say they're pro-lifers would say, I'm going to help to see that every child in the world without parents gets adopted. Every child that's going to be born where the parents don't want a child will be adopted and loved, and every kid can go to school, get an education, get some dental care, get a good diet. That's pro-life to me. And I feel that the pro-life in music and in the wonderful people who created it, all the people I met through that, is energizing. And that's what keeps me going. And sometimes I feel, oh man, I'm getting older, and you feel the Grim Reaper circling the house. Then you say, wham! I was so excited to think I was going back to New Orleans. I forgot how tired I was. And I was able to sit there and talking to you reminds me of all these wonderful things I've just been lucky enough to be part of. And I just really don't want to miss anything of that. So Carolyn Cassidy, when she was in her 80s, she was Neil Cassidy's widow, and Neil was the crazy guy that was Jack Kerouac's inspiration for On the Road. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. She was there drinking white wine and smoking cigarettes. And I said, Carolyn, it's getting kind of late. Don't you think it's time to go to bed? She said, I don't want to miss anything. And I kind of feel that same way. And at the same time, the other joy I have is that I have 3 wonderful kids and a great grandson. And that also is very grounding and also keeps it for real. Because the kids are never impressed by anything that you do unless it's really something worthwhile, which happens occasionally. And they can, and even when they're grown up, they're still your kids and you're still their father. And it makes you tune into other people and other kids too. So I consider myself very blessed. And for all the things that I don't have, I'm grateful for what I do have. And for people who said, you're ahead of your time because now all my stuff's coming out, you know, some of it from years ago and some of it being discovered for the first time. I say, no, I said, none of us are ahead of our time. We're right on time. And sometimes it takes a while. And I always remind young people when they say, what's it like waiting around for this and that? I said, well, Moses was in the desert 40 years, so I'm right on schedule, and so are you.
David, I love talking with you, and I could carry this on for hours, but I know you've got to catch a flight to New Orleans. So let me ask you one last question or have you comment on something. There's a wonderful documentary about your life called David Amram, The First 80 Years. Maybe talk a little about that documentary.
Well, you know, I just made some copies to bring down to show some young musicians I'll meet down there. So that my hope is when their career counselor says to them, you're washed up, you're 24, you're too old, there's no market, there's no demographics, you're wasting your time, do something else, pack it in. That maybe if I get to hang out with them and even give them a copy of the film to show what a wonderful life I've had pursuing my career death wishes to the max. Maybe they'll say, well, gee, if that old guy's still grateful and still having fun and enjoying doing it, maybe with all due respect to my career counselor's wisdom, I'll give it another 2 years anyway. And if that happens, then I will have done something of value and put something, as Dizzy told me on his 70th birthday, I was lucky enough to have him choose me to come down and play at that amazing concert he gave. He said, man, he said, I remember I met you not far from here, from Wolf Trap, down in that basement apartment on 16th Street, way back. That was 1951, way back. And he said, now, he said, time's moved on. He said, you got gray hair. He said, it's time to put something back into the pot. And that's a large part of what you do when you see that that's what you're supposed to do. And if you was lucky, as I was, to be around people that did that all the time.
Wow. Well, you have definitely put something in me that I'll never forget. This conversation has been amazing. And
thank you. I'll tell you, if I could play the horn today as well as you played that trombone and that record, man, I'd be stuck up.
well, that's going on the greatest hits.
Yeah, no, that should be. Any not just trombone players, anybody playing anything, any brass instrument especially. Hear your tonguing and the entrances and the stuff you do, man, it's beautiful.
Well,
Beautiful.
Thank you very much, sir. You've been a pleasure, a gentleman in working with me on the technology to get all this working together. So I'll send you a link to this.
Okay, great.
I thank you very much for your time. It sounds like our timing is good. You've got to leave.
Yes, sir.
All right,
Well,
my friend.
blessing to you for everybody else who's watching this program. Just keep on doing what you're doing and do it more. And if you have any blessings, share them with others.
Amen, brother.
More room in the storage tank for more blessings to come your way.
Take care, my friend.
Okay. Bye-bye.